Now that we've got some test animations, we can go back to looking at ActionScript. And a great place to start would be where we left off last time, and that was simple timeline control. If you remember correctly, all of my ActionScript is going to be applied to some keyframe. So we've already got an actions layer up here that we can use. And like I said before, it's a lot better if you keep this separate from the other elements, and that way you won't get too confused or have to worry about finding it later. First of all, I want to put a keyframe wherever I want my ActionScript to play. And what I'd like to do is stop my timeline right here in the middle of the animation. You can see that the 4 is almost in position, but the tag line is about halfway there. I'll use F6 to create a keyframe at that location, and then we can use our Code Snippets panel to write the ActionScript for us. I've got mine docked over here on the side, but if you don't have yours docked, you can just go up to the Windows pull-down menu, bring up Code Snippets, and then I'd grab it by the tab and go ahead and dock it since we're going to be using it a couple more times. The snippet we're looking for is down here in Timeline Navigation, and I just want the simple stop at this frame. I double click, the program adds it to my Actions panel, and brings up the Action panel so I can see the code that it's writing. I'm going to go for a little better arrangement with my Actions panel. I'm going to drag it by the tab down here to the bottom, and I see the blue line, so it's going to snap into place, and that way I can open it and close it with the gray bar as needed. We can see our little A for action up here on the top of the keyframe, so we know our action was put in the right place. And if I bring that Actions panel back up, we can see by the tab at the bottom the location, and we can see that we just have our simple stop action typed in. Let's try it out. I'll go to Control and Test Movie again. And you can see that my animation stops right where we told it to. Now what we want to do is we want to have a button click signal when it's supposed to go on. Let's close up that preview, and I'm going to close up my Actions panel for the moment, and let's go over to our News button. Setting up an action like stop on a keyframe is easy. All we have to do is select the keyframe. But when we're setting something up on a button, we have to plan a little bit more in advance. Of course I need to select the button so that ActionScript knows which item is going to be the trigger. But I also have to put the playhead where we want the ActionScript to be written. Now let's think about this for a second. I wouldn't want to put the ActionScript out here at frame 15 because I would actually have 15 frames where my button wouldn't work. Now I agree we'd have to have a really fast user to click on it within 15 frames, but still that would create a section of my timeline where the buttons wouldn't work and another section where the buttons would work, and that's just inconsistent. In general, I'd probably like to have my buttons work right from the very beginning. So I'm going to move the playhead back to frame 1. The playhead determines where the script's going to be written because it's still going to go onto a keyframe. I still need to click on the button to make sure that the program knows which item is going to be the trigger. Now over my property window we can see instance name, and we're going to be taking a look at that point once again right after we set up our code snippet. But for the time being we're ready to go. Playhead's in frame 1, News button is selected, I'll go over to my code snippet panel, and this time I'm going to use a click feature. Our second one down is click to go to frame and stop. I'm going to double click, just like before, to apply the snippet, but this time I'm getting a warning. The selected symbol requires an instance name. Now this warning says that Flash will create that name for me and it'll write the code. So I'm going to click OK and let it do that. Now the first thing I want to do actually is close my ActionScript panel and click on News, and we can see the instance name that the program gave, button_1. Now this is kind of neat because you don't have to worry about naming your objects, but the name's not so great. So it might be good from now on to actually name these items first, and then you can use the name you want. Now let's take a look at the ActionScript. First of all, we can see the A up here in the first frame, and that indicates that our ActionScript was placed right at that keyframe. If we go down to Actions and double click, I'm going to make sure I select that keyframe, and it'll show us what it wrote. At the top is what we call a comment. These two symbols, /* and */, allow us to write notes right into the code that won't be executed. And you can actually add comments wherever you want. The actual code is down below here. We can see button_1, that's the name the program gave to our News button. We've got an add event listener for a mouse click, and that's followed by a function call with a really long name. If you match the name up though, you can see that that function is right down here, and it has one instruction: go to and stop at 5. Now if we look at the comment, it actually has instructions. Replace the number 5 in the code below with the frame number you would like the playhead to move to. That means if I go down to where it says 5, I can replace that with any frame that I want the program to move to. And here's what I'd like to do. Our stop action stops the animation right in the middle. But we can see down here that frame, let's see, that looks like frame 28. That would be the end of both animations. So let me go back to frame 1. That's where my ActionScript is. I'll change the 5 to 28. And we'll go and test our movie. Now my timeline script still stops the playhead right where it did before. But remember, we've set up a button now. If I go over to the News button and I click it, the animation should move forward to frame 28, and we can see that both of our elements are now in position. So the keyframe stops the playhead, and the button moves the playhead forward. As you can see, that's a pretty easy way to set up a button. We didn't have to write any code. The program did all the writing for us. There are a couple things that we can do to make things a little bit easier, though. The first one is about the frames. Now I had to go up here and try to figure out what frame number we wanted to work on and then type that frame number in. Of course, if we wanted to change that frame number, we could just come down here to the code and change it anytime we want. But there is an easy way to work through these ones, and that is with frame labels. Now you'll notice I've already got a labels layer up in here and it's empty, but it can have keyframes in it as well. What I'll do is add a keyframe right at frame 28. That's right at the end of the animation. I'm going to select the labels layer, insert a keyframe. You can use F6 if you want. And now we have a new keyframe at that spot. If we select the keyframe, we can go over and see frame properties, and one of them right at the top is a label property. We haven't used this yet. Now you can type whatever you want into here, but since I'm setting up a news button, it might be good for me to add a news label. I'll type in news and hit enter, and you can see that news appears right up at that keyframe, and we also get a little flag icon showing us where that label exists. Now you can use labels just to mark certain points in the timeline, especially if you have a really long timeline that you're trying to navigate. It's just nice to see where a news portion might start, and you can easily move the playhead to that spot. Now if we go back to the ActionScript that we wrote before, back here on frame 1, I can actually use the label instead of a number. We would do this by selecting 28, and I'm going to type in the word news in quotes. You'll want to make sure that the label matches and put it in quotes each time, but this way we can understand our timeline a lot better. We don't have numbers sitting in here, we actually have context that tells us where we're going to. Now let's just try this out. If I go to my control panel and test movie, once again my movie stops at the very beginning. I click on news and it goes to the same spot, but now it's doing so with the label instead of the number. Now the reason this is nice and easy is I can just move this keyframe around wherever I want. I could move it back here a little bit so that my animation was stopping before the tagline got finished. And using the label, I don't have to go back down into my ActionScript panel and change the number all the time. Now, the other thing that we can do to make our lives a little bit easier in this case is to make sure that our names are all cleaned up so that when we come back to this application, we can find things later. Now, just because the program put the name in for us doesn't mean we can't change it. I'm going to close my Actions panel, go back to my News button, and I'm going to change this to a better name, something like News_BTN. Now, there are rules here. We can't have any spaces or dashes, no weird characters except maybe underscore. And you can see I've added a little _BTN so that I can tell this is a button in my ActionScript panel. If we change the name here and we've already got code written for it, it's going to break. So we're going to have to go update our code. Let me go back to frame 1. I'll bring up my Actions panel. And we'll have to go into the code any place where it has the old name and replace it with the new name. news_btn. Make sure you type it exactly the same. And that's how the program matches the function with the actual button on the stage. Let's just test everything to make sure it's still working right. And there we can see it stopping, and it goes forward just like before. So we haven't broken anything. If you're having any trouble, you'll have to go check your names and make sure they match.